Hello, I'm Rebecca. And I'm Momo McSquirrel. Momo and I have an exciting offer for our listeners. Starting this December, we are launching a fun new way for kids to learn about virtues. We are calling it Letters from Momo.
That's right! I want to send your kids a snail mail letter every month.
In each letter, Momo will be writing about one virtue. He will share some stories about his life here in the forest and also share mini biographies of famous people who practice those virtues. There will also be a Try It Yourself section where Momo gives kids good ideas for how to practice the virtue themselves.
I have so many ideas that I can't wait to share them with your kids.
We are so excited about Letters from Momo and hope you are too. So stay tuned because we soon will be sharing more details on how to sign up for Letters from Momo. And now, let the story begin. Hi, and welcome to Lamplighter Podcast. My name is Rebecca, and this is my squirrel friend, Momo.
Hello, kids!
We have an exciting story for you today. In each of our stories, we are going to learn about one virtue. A virtue is anything that is good and right and true. Virtues are like little lights that shine bright and beautiful in a story. We love bringing you Lamplighter stories with no distractions, meaning no sponsors or ads. If you'd like to support us in this mission and to learn more about Lamplighter, please visit patreon.com/lamplighterkids. So, are you ready? Come and listen while we light the way to your imagination. Welcome back to another Lamplighter adventure. Momo and I have been painting pumpkins all morning. I decided to paint a cute little cat on my pumpkin, and what's that you're painting on there, Momo?
Oh, I'm painting an oak tree.
An oak tree? That's interesting. It looks very nice, but why are you painting an oak tree?
Because acorns fall from oak trees, of course. I wish I had my home in an oak tree, then I'd never have to look for acorns again.
I guess that would be a perfect house for you. Well, it's a beautiful pumpkin and kind of reminds me of a story about a pumpkin and a home.
Well, I do love listening to stories while I paint. Maybe you can share it?
I'd love to. Our story today takes place as the weather was growing colder and colder one fall day. Once, in a beautiful garden that lay in front of a cozy home, there lived a little garden gnome named Gary. Gary was a cute little garden gnome, a statue of a short man with pink cheeks, pointy hat, and a long white beard. Gary brought a smile to the people who walked by the house every day. The gardener who lived in the house would move Gary around the garden so that the children who walked home from school would stop and play the game of hide-and-seek Gary. Gary loved watching their faces as they leaned over the short fence and looked around the zucchinis and tomatoes, trying to spot his bright red and blue clothes somewhere. When they would find him, they would all laugh and clap with delight, and then they'd have to wait until the gardener moved Gary again, and the game would start all over again. At the end of every fall, before the frost and cold and snow set in, the gardener would always place Gary in the garden shed to protect him from the weather until the next spring. He wanted to make sure that Gary's bright red paint and smooth surface didn't get ruined in the harsh winter wind and snow. Gary knew the time was coming soon when he would spend another winter there in the shed. The leaves had already fallen and the trees looked like spider webs all across the gray skies above. The garden had already had most of its crops harvested and looked brown and tired. The only color left in the garden was the bright orange pumpkins in the far back corner. Gary knew that once the pumpkins were picked, the first snow was sure to be near. He sighed. He always loved being out in the garden with the kids laughing at their games. Being in the shed all winter long was a bit lonely, but there was nothing he could do about it, so he enjoyed his last few days out in the garden. He watched as the gardener raked brown and red leaves. The gardener looked over and saw Gary. He walked across the small yard and picked him up.
"It's almost time to put you in the shed for the year."
The gardener looked up at the gray sky.
"Don't want your pretty paint getting worn in the weather. Let's find you one last good hiding spot for those kids."
The gardener looked around and then said,
"Aha, here's a good spot."
He walked over to the pumpkin patch and sat Gary right between two large pumpkins. Gary felt excited. This was a great hiding spot. The kids would have to look hard to see him there. The gardener was also pleased and continued raking leaves, getting ready for the long winter ahead. Later that night, a large storm began to blow over Gary's garden. The cold wind pushed harder and harder, and then rain and sleet began falling from the sky. The wind made a low howling noise as it blew through the fence and rattled the thin tree branches above. Gary couldn't remember a storm this big before. He looked up at the black sky and then, to his surprise, noticed that there was something flying through the air. Lots of somethings. They flew by and thumped all around him. He looked to see where they were coming from and then noticed that they were flying off the gardener's roof. It was the shingles from his roof. They couldn't hold on in this wind, and one by one they began flying off. There was nothing Gary could do but watch in sadness as the storm blew all around him. The next morning, the gardener and all the neighbors came out shaking their heads. Many roofs had been ruined in the storm, with small square shingles lying everywhere. They all got to work right away, knowing it had to be fixed before another storm blew through. Thankfully, the next few days were blue and beautiful. The gardener was busier than ever trying to get his roof fixed. As the days wore on and the roof got fixed, the gardener stopped coming out as often since the weather was growing colder. Gary began to wonder if the gardener had forgotten about him. What would happen to his bright paint and smooth skin if he had to stay out here all winter? How would the children play their games if he looked like a gray, boring old statue, not a bright garden gnome? Gary spent the night dreaming of gray garden gnomes, and when he woke up, there was a thin layer of snow on his head. Now he knew for sure the gardener had forgotten him. He was going to spend the winter outside. He looked down sadly and said to himself, "Well, I guess it's just me and the pumpkins this winter. I bet the gardener won't want to use me next year, 'cause I'll be all cracked and full of cobwebs." Apparently, he had forgotten the pumpkins as well in his rush to get his roof fixed.
What did you say?
A little voice asked. I said, I guess the gardener won't... What? Wait, who said that? Gary looked around, confused.
I did,
said the voice. Gary looked around again. It sounded like it was coming from the pumpkin right next to him. A talking pumpkin? He said in amazement. But I didn't know pumpkins could talk.
No, silly. I'm not a pumpkin.
Just then, the pumpkin began to wiggle, and to Gary's surprise, the top popped right off the pumpkin, and a small mouse with large ears peeked out.
I'm a mouse! My name is Pumpkin!
The gray mouse smiled wide. Gary sat there, confused as to how the mouse got into the pumpkin. "You're Bumpkin and you live in a pumpkin?" Gary said.
I know it's kind of funny that my name rhymes, but my parents named me Bumpkin way before we knew we'd have a pumpkin home someday. And I already know your name. You're Gary.
"You're right, but how do you know my name? I've never seen you before."
Oh, I've seen you lots. Us mice are very good at sneaking around if we want to. My family has lived around this house for a long time. We are always finding new homes to live in, and this year, since the gardener forgot to harvest his pumpkins, we thought it'd be fun to have a pumpkin home. I think it might be my favorite home so far. It's going to be so cozy and warm this winter.
Gary looked down sadly. "That sounds nice. Usually I spend the winter somewhere safe like that, but the gardener forgot to put me away this year. Now I'm not sure he'll ever want to use me to decorate the garden again." Bumpkin slid down the side of the pumpkin and jumped in front of Gary.
But you have to be in this garden. The children love finding you, and you're so bright and happy, and oh, there has to be something we can do to help.
Gary smiled. "I wish I had met you before. You were very kind. It's nice of you to want to help, but I really don't think there's anything to do about it. You can't lift me up and carry me far away to the shed." Bumpkin put his hand under his chin, thinking hard.
No, we can't carry you very far, but we can push you not very far. Yes, it's an excellent plan.
And with that, Bumpkin scrambled back up the pumpkin, opened the lid, and jumped back inside. Gary was left confused once again. "Bumpkin? Bumpkin? What are you talking about?" he yelled through the pumpkin walls. But just then he began to hear many noises coming from inside the pumpkin. It sounded like there were more mice in there. There was scraping and scratching and squeaking. "Now, what in the world are they doing in there?" said Gary. The sounds continued for quite some time. Soft snowflakes began to fall again as the noise continued. Gary hoped that whatever Bumpkin was planning, it would happen soon. He was getting snowed on again. Just then, there was a loud ripping sound, and one large side of the pumpkin opened up, just like a door, right near Gary. If he could have jumped in surprise, he would have. There before him was a large door in the side of the pumpkin, and standing inside was Bumpkin and 4 other kind-looking mice.
Ta-da!
Bumpkin said, lifting his arms in the air.
Welcome to your new winter home.
Behind the mouse family was the coziest, warmest home Gary had ever seen. It was nothing like the cold garden shed where he usually spent his winters. This home had small furniture that the mice had made, paintings along the walls, and fuzzy blankets all over the floors. There was food stored up in one corner, and in the middle was a lit candle that filled the house with warmth. "This home is amazing, but I don't understand. Why did you open the side of the pumpkin?" Gary asked.
Why, we're going to slide you in here, of course. You're going to spend the winter with us,
Bumpkin said, and his mom and dad and siblings nodded their heads, and then they all began to gather around Gary and push him slowly into the house. "This is so kind, and I don't have any way to repay you," Gary said as they were sliding him in. "Nonsense," said Daddy Mouse as he pushed harder. "No payment needed. It'll be nice to have a guest join us this winter." Gary wanted to protest more. Why were the mice being so kind to him? But they were already pushing him, and he was halfway in the pumpkin. Not only would his paint stay bright and clean, but he also wouldn't be lonely this winter. It all seemed almost too good to be true. Finally, with one last push, Gary slipped into the pumpkin. The small mice jumped and clapped to see that he fit perfectly. Then they closed up the large side door of the pumpkin and settled down around the fire together.
This is gonna be great,
said Bumpkin, who had settled down with a mouthful of dried fruit in his mouth.
We've never had a garden gnome stay with us. One time we had a spider, but that wasn't so great because he was cranky all the time.
The conversations went on, everyone getting to know each other well. Gary knew he was going to like Bumpkin and his family. This might even be the best winter he had ever had. As it got later and later, Bumpkin's little siblings fell asleep. Gary, Bumpkin, and his parents sat quietly around the candle now, which had almost burned out for the evening. Then Mama Mouse began to hum a tune, which Daddy Mouse soon joined, and before long, they were all singing around the fire.
The sky is gray outside, but here we are so cozy. When fall turns into winter winds, we must remember one thing, that kindness is always in season, there's always need. Yes, kindness is always in season, be kind to the ones you see.
Gary spent a wonderful winter with his mice friends and almost wished that it would never end. But once spring came again, Gary found himself longing for the warm outdoors and the hide-and-seek games with children. So one day, Bumpkin and his family helped Gary back out of the pumpkin with lots of hugs and happy goodbyes. But they weren't too sad, because the mice had decided to move once again into a cozy hole in the tree above the garden. There, they would be very close neighbors to Gary and promised to visit him often. The gardener was extremely surprised to see Gary sitting outside among the pumpkins. He realized then that he had forgotten to put Gary in the shed. He picked him up gently, expecting to find much winter damage to his beloved little gnome. But then he was even more surprised to see that Gary looked as good as new. He scratched his head in confusion, but seeing no explanation for it, he shrugged his shoulders and looked for a good place to hide Gary. He smiled and walked over to a shovel leaning against the fence and placed Gary behind it, just a little bit of his bright colors sticking out. Gary couldn't wait for the children to come find him.
Oh, that story made me feel all cozy and warm inside, which is good since it's sure getting cold outside. I am so happy the mouse family decided to help Gary get away from the cold. That was very kind of them.
Exactly! In fact, that is our virtue for today. Kindness. Kindness means being nice to people. If you keep your eyes open, you can always find some way to be kind to those around you. You can help your mom take in the groceries, or play with a friend who seems lonely, or say something nice to someone. In today's story, Bumpkin and his family showed kindness to Gary by sharing their pumpkin home with him when he needed it most.
Hey, maybe I should practice some kindness and I can give this pumpkin to my Grandma McSquirrel. Do you think she'd like this oak tree?
I think she would love it, Momo. That is a very beautiful oak tree.
And Grandma McSquirrel loves acorns, just like me.
Well, why don't we go over and give it to her right now? Although, first, it's question time. Question 1. Can you think of someone who has shown you kindness? How did they show you kindness? Question 2. How can you show kindness to someone around you today? All right, Momo, are you ready to go deliver your pumpkin to Grandma McSquirrel? I'm sure she'd be happy to see us.
Of course! Let me go get my jacket on. Oh, I'm a squirrel. I don't wear jackets. Never mind. Let's go!
Coming right after. See you next time on the next Lamplighter Adventure. Thanks for listening to Lamplighter Podcast today. If you liked our story, please leave us a review. It really helps other listeners find these stories. If you'd like to send a donation to keep Lamplighter Podcast ad-free, please visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/lamplighterkids. I also love to hear from my listeners. If you'd like to send suggestions, comments, or tell me of times you practiced a virtue, please email lamplighterkids@gmail.com.